Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. I thought that I would do something a little bit different today. Recently, I was reading criticism by the poet Randall Jarrell, and then not that long ago, I read an essay by the poet Thom Gunn. And so today I thought that I would read some of Thom Gunn's criticism, just a couple of paragraphs wherein he talks about the poet Thomas Hardy, and then read a poem by Thomas Hardy. Now, Thom Gunn is not one of my favorite poets. I believe he was a friend of the neurologist Oliver Sacks, and together they hung out with W.H. Auden, perhaps. I don't know their biographical details, but so I believe he held good company. But his work on the page has never particularly spoken to me, at least in terms of his poetry. But I am always curious about the criticism written by a practicing poet. Thomas Hardy is another matter. I have always loved Hardy's poetry, but as with any poet, when I say something of that nature, I love their poetry selectively. So there is probably no poet of whom I love every single line unequivocally. But be that as it may, I have a more secure relationship with the verse of Hardy than with Gunn. But I would like to read a couple of paragraphs and then read something by Hardy. The characteristic of Hardy's poetry that seems to place it most firmly among that of his contemporaries is that it is narrative poetry. One of the major concerns of Victorian poets was to find a modern substitute for the epic, whether in longer attempts like The Idylls of the King or The Ring and the Book, or in shorter narratives. And certainly one way in which they tried to find it was through ballads. There is, too, a temptation to think of Hardy as a novelistic poet. But I would suggest that though some poems are, as we shall see, novelistic in presentation, we think of him so because we are remembering that he did not start publishing books of poetry until he had published almost the last of his many novels. Though in truth, as Donald Davidson showed, the novels themselves derived from ballads. Such poems as Who's in the Next Room or During the Wind and Rain go back to the same sources as Far from the Madding Crowd or Tess. There is a single-mindedness in Hardy's attachment to the ballads, even though he may have made 19th and 20th century emphases in them, that is greater than that of any of his contemporaries. Without their ballads and ballad-influenced poems, there would still remain a major part of Browning's or Tennyson's work, let alone Swinburne's, Arnold's, or Hopkins's. But without such poems, there would be practically nothing of Hardy's poetry left. And I hope to show how the influence of the ballads continues even into his most personal poems. I am convinced that all good writing, as well as some bad, is the product of obsession. Hardy's mastering obsession in his prose as well as in his poetry was a regret for the past. I would call it nostalgia if the word didn't imply something enervating. On the contrary, it was the source of his strength. That is, the strength of his best poetry and of the ideas most powerfully realized in it. not the didactically presented ideas, the pessimism, but the ideas implicit in and inseparable from such a poem as During Wind and Rain. In any case, it is incontestable that a large majority of his poems deal with a calling up of the past, usually combined with a regret for its passing, whether it is a public past, as in the ballads to do with the Napoleonic Wars, or private, as in the poems of 1912-1913 about his first wife, or a kind of combination of the two, as in During Wind and Rain. So, During Wind and Rain was not a poem that was familiar to me, so I looked it up. And I would say it was not one of the poems that struck me when I read this giant volume many years ago. Now, this had been in the possession of a friend. I borrowed it, and then later when that friend died, I inherited it. So I have not been in touch with the bulk of Hardy's poetry for a long time, but having this as a good resource, I looked up During Wind and Rain, and so I would like to read that to you so that you know what Gunn was talking about. During Wind and Rain. They sing their dearest songs, he, she, all of them, yea, treble and tenor and bass, and one to play, with the candles mooning each face. Ah, no, the years, oh, how the sick leaves reel down in throngs. They clear the creeping moss, elders and juniors, aye, making the pathways neat and the garden gay, and they build a shady seat. Ah, no, the years, see the white storm birds wing across. They are blithely breakfasting all, men and maidens, yea, under the summer tree, with a glimpse of the bay, while pet fowl come to the knee. Ah, no, the years, oh, and the rotten rose is ripped from the wall. They change to a high new house, he, she, all of them, aye, clocks and carpets and chairs on the lawn all day, and brightest things that are theirs. Ah, no, the years, down their carved names the raindrop plows. I'll leave that there with the poem by Thomas Hardy. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.